InsideArabia.com. By the way, they're based in Washington, D.C., joining us now live in Toronto, which is kind of neat. Alessandro Bruno.
It's Alexander in Italian.
Okay, Alexander in Italian, Alessandro Bruno in Toronto. Thanks for joining us, Alessandro. I didn't want to mangle your first name. And so thank you for that. Hey, before we get to your piece on Inside Arabia, go to InsideArabia.com. I want to talk about what's going on in Canada as it compares to the U.S. What is your lockdown situation? Are businesses starting to open? Give us an update.
Well, the lockdown for me personally has not been all that bad. You know, I've eaten very good food and enjoyed. The weather hasn't been that. You know, it's been a milder April, at least as far as snowfall was concerned. So a lot of walks and bicycling and empty roads. So I love that. I'm actually not looking forward to the return to normality, other than the opening of restaurants and the barbers, because I definitely need a haircut. Yeah. But in general, the lockdown in Canada has been milder than, say, for example, the lockdowns in Europe. Food stores were open. There were lineups in places, and a lot of these stores closed earlier than their normal hours. But by and large, I've had no problem going, just a little bit extra patience. And in fact, you did the lineup outside, but then when you were inside, it was faster checking out. So on the balance, the store times were the same. And a lot of people have been working from home already. That trend was beginning. I think the financial district was hollowed out, and that's when you probably notice the most change, because Toronto has a major financial district, just as New York has, very similar, big towers, lots of traffic during the day. And it has neighborhoods not far from it, even within walking distance, which are quieter, and then but you wouldn't notice this lockdown unless you really stepped out of these quieter neighborhoods. So, and I think I don't know about when their businesses are starting to open. Quebec, which has had the worst experience with coronavirus because of some botching up of particularly of elderly homes, or homes for the elderly, where they created a problem by essentially blocking them in and causing a huge disaster, really, from what I've read, people dying and bodies left for days because nobody could get to them. But anyway, Quebec has had the worst experience, and they were thinking of opening next week, but I think they've postponed that to toward the end of May now, a partial opening. So
and the
business is still closed.
Situation in Quebec, was that mainly older homes, rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, or is that just a general public?
Yes, no, it was, that really was the if you look at the numbers, Quebec's, the percentage of deaths and the percentage of people infected with the virus is much higher than the rest of Canada, and it really is a problem related to these retirement centers, and it's unique in it, and it's a very clear case. So Ontario, for example, which has the highest population in Canada, has had a much lower percentage of infections to population ratio. So it's been much not too bad here. I think you also have to mention Canada has a very low population density.
Right, but it's kind of like the same in the United States. I mean, we have 70,000 dead. We're not really sure how many of these are COVID-19 because in the U.S. hospitals have an incentive to code everybody that comes in that they can as COVID-19 because the federal government gives them another $13,000 per patient. So if somebody sneezes, they code it as COVID-19, and then that ends up on their death certificate. So we're not sure how many people have died actually from the virus, but let's say it's 50,000, 60, whatever the number is. If you take out people that are under 50, the number gets cut to like 8,000. So, I mean, it seems like you got the same thing. We need to protect the vulnerable, protect the elderly, and basically everybody else just has to be able to go out and live. I want to get to your piece, but I got one other question. Prime Minister Trudeau, in the middle of this, he sends an edict out that he's going to ban assault weapons and give everybody a 3-year period in Canada to turn in their guns, or then I guess after that they'll go to confiscation. How was that received in Canada in general?
Well, it's difficult for me to gauge how it was received because I haven't had my usual conversations with people outside. But in general, I think also the confiscation period will take an effect after 2 years, I believe. It's a 2-year.
I'm sorry, 2 years.
But I thought, it could have been 2 years. But there was, in the middle of this coronavirus situation, there was Canada's worst mass shooting in one of the eastern provinces. I think 20 people died, and it was obvious that the person who committed this crime had some serious issues. He had a police car. He bought one of those used police cars, but was made sure that it was painstakingly close in details to the actual police car. Now, why would someone do that? I mean, other than perhaps facilitate speeding on the highway without getting caught. I don't know. But he used that car to commit his crimes. This guy had some serious problems. But the decision is not, it has been controversial. I mean, there are, we don't have the equivalent of an NRA, but there are associations that protect the rights of gun owners. And I'm sure it'll cause some problems. In particular, the problem that I see the most is at a general political level, because a lot of the gun owners are in the province of Alberta, which already has issues with the rest of Canada. It's the oil-producing province, and there have been regular spats between Alberta and Ottawa, the capital of Canada, from the distribution of oil revenue to issues like gun legislation. So this could create, I think, a bigger rift between Alberta and the rest of Canada, and potentially some even a political crisis. Alberta has been on the edge for some time, and now with oil prices completely collapsed, I can see that this is going to be just one more issue, one more contentious issue that will divide the country. On the other hand, then there's, of course, I tend to look at these issues. I'm not a gun owner, but I do understand that some people like to collect things, and they like to have their objects. I know some gun collectors. I can appreciate beautiful things, and so I know that it will cause me some who I might be considered a liberal not in the modern sense, but more in the 60s sense. I've never really liked guns. I like cars, but I do know if people told me that I couldn't own my car, particularly I fear one day the electric car will dominate, and I would feel it at a personal level. So I do appreciate that this is not going to go down easily, and once the coronavirus situation clears, I think the debate will be more intense than the Prime Minister expects.
All right. Well, that's a fantastic update on that. We're with Alessandro Bruno. He is a senior contributor with Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com. That is my number one news and analysis site that I go to. First thing I do every day, go to InsideArabia.com for news and analysis on the Middle East and the Gulf. Speaking of that, you had a story in a couple days ago. Has COVID-19 inoculated Tunisia against authoritarianism? I wanted to get you on to talk about this because in the U.S., it's the exact opposite, right? The COVID-19 is leading our country towards authoritarianism because we got all these governors basically telling us what to do, how to live, what to wear, where to stand. How is this being reversed, as your article says, in Tunisia?
Well, I was inspired, or at least my idea came when I noticed that the Tunisian government. First of all, let's give a short background on Tunisia and why I picked that. Tunisia is where the alleged Arab Spring of 2011 began.
Right.
And of all the countries that have experienced turmoil since 2011, Tunisia might be the only one to have achieved true reforms. The country now has a government that might be considered the most, at least on paper, the most democratic in North Africa, and perhaps, other than Lebanon, the most democratic in the whole Middle East, North Africa region. They have political parties, they've had elections, and so far, with some growing troubles, they've had a few terrorist attacks, but that was also caused by situations outside Tunisia. They've managed to survive, and this democracy is slowly entrenching itself. Now, the reason why I say that the coronavirus could be an opportunity and a test for this democracy is because the government of Tunisia decided to adopt special powers, just like the governors in the United States, to adopt the quarantine measures and lockdowns and so on. Now, the test is this. If Tunisia can survive this return to authoritarianism, in other words, the temptation to keep the authoritarian policies in place, if they can overcome them, in other words, if in 2 months or in a few weeks, actually at this point, they release the measures and they withdraw the special clause in the Constitution that allowed them to adopt this special legislation, then it will have passed a major test. Because you can imagine, for countries that were authoritarian not long ago, going back to a much less democratic system than they've become accustomed to in the past few years, could be a temptation to reverse all the achievements, all the progress that has been made, and that's always the problem, particularly in the Middle East, and it's a problem when you are in a transition. So if they can go back to where they were before the coronavirus pandemic, I think they will have gained the trust of the population, and the population will be more confident in this new government, and it'll be a stronger government ultimately. So it's a serious and important test. Sorry, yes.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean that was the main idea behind the article.
Look, it's a fascinating piece because we've talked about Tunisia on my show before. I had a couple leaders on, and one of the things we had talked about is the unbelievable empowerment of women there.
Yes,
much unlike
compared to the rest.
Yeah, compared to the rest. And I've traveled in the Gulf and the Middle East. The only state that is even that I could compare is comparable to that is Qatar, which recently has really empowered women. I mean, they own businesses. They dominate the education city there. They're in all the master's programs. They can drive. If they don't want to wear the covering, they don't. It's up to them. A lot of other Gulf states intimidated by that. It's the kind of thing, Alessandro. That's why I loved your piece. When you let freedom out of the bottle, it's tough to get it back in. Right? It kind of pops out. People don't want to go back. So I think it was a fascinating column you did, and you can read it. Go to InsideArabia.com. Has COVID-19 inoculated Tunisia against authoritarianism? Because you're right. If the leaders in Tunisia can go back and give the power and the freedom back to the people after they usurped it as a response to this virus, then you can pretty much say, okay, that level of freedom they have, that level of democracy has taken root, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Sorry, with that root, that means they have the stability and the confidence. The country can grow and go past the tensions and the constant wondering, will we go back to a dictatorship? And even there is an Islamist party in Tunisia. It's called Ennahda. It's one of the original Islamist parties. It's related to the Muslim Brotherhood. But one of the keys to Tunisia's stability is the fact that the leader of Ennahda decided to take a less ideological stance. It's become a more democratic Islamist party. So one that you can deal with, one that you can negotiate with. And in some ways, it reminds me of the Christian Democrats in Europe, the Christian democratic parties that led especially countries like Italy and Germany out of the mess of the World War II, post-World War II situation. They were Christian in inspiration and in culture, but they managed to overcome the religious problematics to govern in a way that would be suitable for everyone. And I think that is what's happening in Tunisia. They are really moving in a favorable direction from many points of view. And I've been to Tunisia many times. It has to be given credit. Even during the dictatorship, women were always very strong in Tunisia. The Tunisia's model, I think, it's sad because Tunisia is one of the poorest Arab countries, but it's also one of the most progressive, and has been for some time, long before the Arab Spring, because it doesn't have oil. So Tunisia had to develop actual institutions. It had to deal with the population on a different level. Oil makes everything easy. You've got money from the oil, then you can buy people's loyalty with very lavish social programs and so on, as the Saudis do. But in Tunisia, they actually had to create some links between the government and the people, even during the authoritarian times. Now, there are many problems in Tunisia. Unemployment is huge. Tourism will have been devastated, and the country, at least 8 or 9% of the GDP comes from tourism. And one challenge will be the Southern Europe in particular, countries like Italy, France, Spain, invested a lot in Tunisia. But they are under their own pressure right now. In fact, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Arab Spring began in Tunisia a few years after the financial crisis, because a lot of investment, a lot of tourism stopped from Southern Europe in particular. So, but on the whole, this has been the one successful experiment of the so-called Arab Spring.
I tell you what, great piece that Alessandro has. Go to InsideArabia.com for that. InsideArabia.com, Alessandro Bruno live in Toronto, Canada. And not only did you give us a Tunisia update on the great piece, but you told us what's going on in Canada, and we got into a little Canadian politics. Outstanding segment. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Go to InsideArabia.com. You can read them there. That's my source for news and analysis of the Middle East and the Gulf. And they're based right in Washington, D.C., right up the street from me. So they're really good peeps, and they do a good job there. And I don't know how you found them, but you're a really good writer, and I enjoyed your piece, and now I've tagged you. So whenever you put a piece up, it pops right up to my phone. See? So you got a fan.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You got a fan. All right, man. Thank you.